In the history of sports, there are athletes, defined by their physical gifts. There are champions, defined by the gold they wear. There are legends, defined by the eras they command. And then, there is a monster, a myth, a paradox. And then, there is Jon Jones. He's a fighter so gifted, so brilliant, that his talent feels like a glitch in the simulation. A fighter engineered in a lab to be perfect. A man who saw the geometry of violence in a way no one else could. He didn't just fight, he composed symphonies of destruction with an impossible reach and an unorthodox creativity that felt alien. He became the youngest champion in the history of the UFC, not by winning, but by conquering. He didn't just clean out the most dangerous division in the sport, he dismantled a generation of killers, turning legends like Shogun, Machida, and Rampage into footnotes in his own story. For a time, he was considered by almost everyone to be the greatest of all time. Perfect, unbeatable, but for every moment of godlike genius inside the cage, there was a moment of baffling madness outside of it, a parallel narrative of chaos that ran alongside his ascent. There is another Jon Jones, a ghost that haunts his every victory, a shadow that grew longer and darker with every belt he won, a man whose greatest battles were fought not under the bright lights of the arena with the world watching, but in the dark, lonely corners of his own soul, long after the crowds had gone home. His story is not the classic tale of a rise to the top and a fall from grace. It's the far more tragic story of a man standing at the summit of the world, who chose to throw himself off again and again. It's the story of a king who torched his own kingdom, not once, but repeatedly, leaving nothing but ashes and questions in his wake. This is not a tale of a defeat at the hands of an opponent, because no opponent could ever truly beat him. It is a tale of a defeat at the hands of himself. This is the story of the man who could outsmart, overpower, and dismantle anyone, but could never escape the enemy within. And that is a war he may have already lost. He didn't just arrive, he materialized, seemingly from nowhere, a long-limbed, impossibly creative prodigy from upstate New York, who seemed less like a product of a gym and more like a fighter engineered in a lab to be perfect. At just 23 years old, an age where most fighters are still learning, still dreaming, he was already standing across the octagon from a living legend, the champion, Mauricio Shogun Rua, a killer from the golden age of pride. What happened that night in Newark, New Jersey, wasn't a fight, it was an unveiling, it was a transfer of power, a coronation. Jones didn't just beat the champion, he systematically deconstructed him. He dismantled him, piece by agonizing piece, mercilessly, methodically, with a nightmarish creativity the world of Mama had never seen before. Spinning elbows, oblique kicks that destroyed knees, a cruel and surgical ground and pound. It was the birth of a king. He became the youngest champion in UFC history, and that was just the beginning. What followed was not a title reign, it was a reign of terror. He began a chilling march through a murderer's row of Mama royalty, collecting the souls of legends one by one. He didn't just beat Quinton Rampage Jackson, a fearsome brawler, he choked him out with contemptuous ease. He didn't just beat the karate master Lyoto Machida, he put him to sleep on his feet, dropping his unconscious body to the canvas in one of the most haunting and disrespectful images in UFC history. He didn't just beat his former friend and training partner Rashad Evans, he psychologically tortured him, turning their history into a weapon. He wasn't just defeating them, he was playing with them, using their own weapons against them with cold, calculated precision. He wasn't just a champion, he was an enigma. And to the public, he was perfect, with a disarming smile on his face and a Bible verse on his lips. After every brutal victory, he crafted the perfect image of a clean, sponsor-friendly hero that the sport had been desperately waiting for. The world was at his feet. He was young, unbeatable, charismatic. He was the future. But no one knew that behind the mask of the perfect champion, a darkness was hiding, festering, and waiting for its moments to consume everything. The first cracks in the perfect facade appeared in 2012. It wasn't a Raw, but a jarring siren of twisted metal from a crashed Bentley that echoed through the news headlines. His first DUI arrest. For the first time, the carefully constructed illusion of the perfect champion faltered. He was no longer just a phenom, he was a liability. The apology tour began immediately. He played the part of the fallen hero perfectly. He was contrite. He was humbled. He promised to be better. And the world, desperate for a hero, chose to believe him. But it was only a prologue, a dress rehearsal for the chaos to come. But the most chilling moment, the one that truly peeled back the curtain, happened behind the scenes. Captured by a hot mic he thought was off. When he thought the world wasn't listening, Jones, with a calm, chilling smile on his face, looked at Cormier and said the words that would define him forever. "I would literally kill you if I was allowed to." In that one sentence, the illusion was vaporized. This wasn't trash talk. This was something darker, something pathologically real. In that moment, the world saw the real Jon Jones, not the pious champion who thanked God after every victory, but a cold, arrogant predator who saw his opponents not as competitors, but as prey. And the free fall was just beginning. What followed wasn't a decline. It was a free fall, a chaotic chain of self-destruction, so relentless and profound, it remains unparalleled in the history of sports. First came the whispers, then the confirmation, the cocaine scandal. Just weeks before the biggest fight of his life against Daniel Cormier, he tests positive for the drug. He goes on to win the fight, a dominant performance, but the victory is forever tainted. His reputation was stained with a secret he could no longer hide. Then, in 2015, came the disaster that didn't just stain his reputation, it ripped the crown from his head. The hit and run. He ran a red light, the sickening crunch of metal, followed by silence, as he crashed his rental car into a vehicle driven by a pregnant woman. And then, in an act of pure cowardice, he ran, not to check on the victim, not to face the consequences, but back to his own car, to grab a handful of cash, before fleeing the scene on foot. He was stripped of his title. The king was dethroned, not by a warrior in a cage, but by his own cowardice on a public street. He returned, a year later, promising redemption, set to headline the monumental FC 200 against Cormier. The stage was set for the greatest comeback story, but just days before the event, the story turned into a nightmare. He was pulled from the card for a failed drug test. At the press conference that followed, he wasn't a champion. He was a broken man, crying uncontrollably, a spectacle of grief and denial, swearing his innocence, while the world watched his downfall in real time. He returned again. This time, he looked flawless, a brutal ghost of his former self. He knocked out Daniel Cormier in their second fight, a brutal head kick that seemed to exorcise all his demons and closed the book on their rivalry. He reclaimed his throne in one of the greatest performances ever. But the triumph was a mirage. It lasted only a few weeks before the news broke. Another failed drug test, this time for steroids. The victory was overturned and erased from history. The title was stripped from him again. The haunting, heartbreaking images of Daniel Cormier, crying as he was handed back a title he didn't want, became the defining symbol of this tragicomedy. Domestic violence charges that left his fiancée bloodied and terrified. Bizarre run-ins with the law in Albuquerque. A scandal involving a waitress at a strip club. Every headline was worse than the last. This was no longer a series of mistakes. It was a pattern, a spiral. The greatest talent in the history of the sport was systematically and publicly erasing his own legacy, but did return in a new weight class against a new generation. The questions swirled. Was he too old? Too slow? Had the demons finally won? He answered them all, 124 seconds. He faced the interim heavyweight champion, Cyril Gane, and he didn't just beat him. He walked through him, choked the doubt out of an entire sport, and became the heavyweight champion of the world. It was a final, brutal closing argument in the debate for the greatest of all time. This was supposed to be his redemption, the final chapter where the hero conquers all and finds peace. but the celebration felt hollow. It was too late. The new belt couldn't erase the mugshots. It couldn't silence the police sirens. It couldn't heal the relationships he had broken. The gold couldn't hide the deep, permanent rust on his legacy. He was king again, but his kingdom was already in ruins. Today, Jon Jones sits on the heavyweight throne, the undisputed champion of the world. And yet, he's a ghost. He reigns in silence, a king who rarely holds court, a ruler whose name echoes more often in police reports than it does in the annals of combat. His crown is heavy, not just with gold, but with the weight of his own transgressions. He's a king without a kingdom. So when the story is finally written, when the dust of his chaotic career settles, how will we remember him? Will we remember the artist, the spectral figure who haunts the dreams of legends, the prodigy who saw the matrix of combat in a way no mortal should, the youngest champion ever, the two-division king whose resume is a graveyard of Hall of Famers, a genius so profound that his accomplishments in the cage should, perhaps, outweigh all of his sins outside of it? Or will we remember the criminal, the man in the mugshot, the flickering neon of a police car reflecting in his eyes, the champion whose greatest victories are permanently, irrevocably marked with an asterisk, the greatest cautionary tale in sports history, a story of how personal demons can devour even the most unbeatable warrior, leaving nothing but wasted potential and broken promises in their wake? The truth is, he is both. The answer is as complex and contradictory as the man himself. Jon Jones is not just a fighter, he's a paradox, a flawed masterpiece, a fallen angel of the sport, a god of combat burdened with the all-too-human frailties of a broken man. And so his legacy will forever be the greatest, most frustrating what-if in the history of sports. What if the hands that created such art were not the same hands that sowed such chaos? What if the genius had not been so relentlessly sabotaged by the demons lurking within? In the end, his story is about a fighter that no one could ever beat, and a man that he could never save. The man who defeated everyone, but could never, ever defeat himself.